When two characters battle, in the infinite potentials of storytelling, there are equally infinite possibilities as to the outcome. Thus, when it comes to the victor and loser, that which separates them is more than just strength. In the context of a narrative, any conflict inherently becomes one of ideology and spirit. And while this is common across all stories, one Straw Hat in particular stands out among his comrades. Because while Luffy must conquer the strongest opponents to achieve his goal, that isn't his goal in itself. Zoro is a man who wants to stand at the pinnacle, becoming the greatest swordsman in the world. And in his story, to become a swordsman is in itself to follow a path. This is made most apparent in the Alabasta Saga, beginning with Little Garden. Zoro could not cut the iron wax trapping him, Nami, and Vivi during the climax, nor did he have the grit to cut through his legs so that he could fight regardless. He was too weak, so he had to become stronger so that even iron would fall to his blade. On Drum Island, he tried to train and find strength, but these exercises brought him no closer to cutting steel, instead only leading to trouble. In order to truly reach that peak, he had to distinguish himself from one who fought only for more than strength, to go beyond cutting steel for the sake of cutting steel. On Little Garden, he aimed to fight and protect himself and his friends, but consciously, Zoro still focused on that same short-sighted reason he did as a child, wanting to cut steel as a show of power and progress. Through nearly losing his life to Mr. One, his haki bloomed, not for the sake of his power, but because he understood that not all things were meant to be cut, such as his comrades. Where Mr. One could only destroy, Zoro cut him down, his understanding of what is important for a swordsman distinguishing him, making him more than just a man with a sword.
ダイヤでも切ろうってのか。
それもったいねえだろ。
And this aspect feeds into many of Zoro's conflicts, before and after. Kabaji was a trickster. He could not dare match Zoro in skill, so he used Circus Axe and aimed for his opponent's injury. He sought any dishonest advantage he could, even accepting his captain's help, as fruitless as it was. But in response, Zoro gave him a concession, going as far as to wound himself even deeper. Kabaji was weak, seeking as many roots to power as he could, but in his dishonor he could accomplish nothing. And when finally attempting to match Zoro as a swordsman, he had nothing to offer. As where Zoro was a swordsman, Kabaji was just a man with a sword. Later, the one called Hachi bragged about the heaviness of his swords, his power as a fishman, and his 6 arms allowing him to possess so much strength. Zoro didn't even have but one sword to his name at the time, borrowing the unfamiliar weapons of Johnny and Yosaku for his battle while suffering wounds that drained his power. And yet, even with half the swords and less than optimal strength, Zoro could use them with far more technique and dexterity than the clumsy Hachi. Without subtlety, a sword is but an iron bar. Hachi merely used the sword because his arms allowed that option, his heavy weapons not nearly having as much weight behind them as Zoro's. Hachi wielded 6 iron bars, but Zoro was a swordsman. On Skypiea, Zoro once again had a moment of growth against Braham. Though he had a new ability to cut steel, with greater focus he could cut even the air. Braham's pistols distracted with flashes of light, but even in spite of that, Zoro retained his acuity, cutting down his enemy. And later against Ohm, he battled a man without that concentration. Ohm was focused on everything but the fight, Enru's survival game and the constant falling of voices drawing Ohm's attention away, where Zoro buckled down and read Ohm's movements even without mantra in his capabilities, waiting until Ohm made his presence known before striking him down. His unfocused opponent met his end. His blade hardly fit in the hands of one whose head was too high in the clouds to ground him in the ways of the sword. But where Zoro was a pirate and a swordsman, Kaku proclaimed himself to be even more. He was an assassin, a swordsman, and a giraffe. But when he fell, he admitted that even while he did not identify as a carpenter any longer, he had enjoyed his cover, his time in that field something he couldn't separate himself from. Barely even able to hold on to his form for so much of the fight, Kaku had trouble accepting who he really was, where Zoro was in full control of shifting his being, knowing exactly what it meant to hold a blade. And yet, the same was not entirely true of his comrade Brook. Brook did use a blade, but becoming the greatest swordsman was not in his sight. even though he didn't have any eyes. When fighting Ryuma, his shadow claimed he would be stronger if he shed his afro. Treasuring his hair, Brook possessed a glaring weak point to be exploited by his enemies, restricting his power. But Brook was not after power. He needed the afro, or else Laboon would not recognize him. As such, while he used a sword, Brook was not a swordsman, just a man who wanted to reunite with his old friend. The greatest swordsman in the world during his lifetime, Ryuma understood Brook's weakness in being a swordsman, the lack of resolve to the blade. Yet in spite of that, Ryuma was a husk of his former self, an abomination, naught but a corpse with the wrong soul, unworthy of the former title in his new facsimile of life. In his defeat, he recognized Zoro as a fellow swordsman, passing on his will, one who was once the strongest, seeing potential in the one who will become the strongest. Zoro triumphed and defeated Ryuma because in order to be the best, he must defeat all, even if his duel with Ryuma was not worth sharing. Yet he still fought, where Pika was one who ran. Pika, however briefly, showed that he could battle with a sword, yet his clashes with Zoro were dodgy, the man focusing on his own mission before any fights. Rather than face Zoro in a duel of swordsmen, he adhered to Doflamingo's orders, attacking the weak, wounded, innocent, and helpless. The swordsman must by nature fight, yet Pika preyed on those who didn't, or even wouldn't. Thus, when he stood to fight Zoro, he had no real defense in his array of skills. A man who barely even used the sword he had. The swordsman is one who meets their opponents head-on, for anything less is simple disrespect. And that's really what it's about. Respect. To fight with honor. With regard to one's own blade. For purposes more noble than simple murder. In all of these, Hyozo with his poison blades, senses dulled by alcohol, wielding 8 swords because he could, and heart lusting for blood, Zoro remarked on his being a frog in a well, one not aware of how small they were in the world, echoing his battle with Mihawk. But while it wasn't versed, Zoro gave Hyozo ample chance to realize his weakness and flee before cutting him down without hesitation, where against Mihawk, Zoro did not truly lose until Mihawk came to respect him, until Zoro earned that respect. While he could not land a blow, Mihawk would not win as long as he continued to toy with his enemy, and yet Zoro proved himself, even though he had much to learn. The enemy is one deserving of respect, as they fight with their ideals against yours, and the winner becomes stronger for doing so. Zoro will never lose against someone who doesn't respect him, as he will never win against one he does not respect. To respect the blade and the way of the sword is ultimately what makes a swordsman. Thank you for watching yet another Straw Hat birthday analysis. These have been incidental, I swear. I would like to thank my patrons such as Mohammed Hakim, Luis Segura, Oliver Mort, Gloogle, Moz, Flarbu, and Mr. Cynical. Thank you for watching.